Hey, I'm Smooneychad, and welcome back to the series where I gradually lose my sanity trying to beat Kerbal Space Program 2 using aircraft only. We're going to try to build a massive Minmus colony using only an SSTO, and with a mission goal like that, there's bound to be a few interesting glitches along the way. We're going to start off by building that SSTO that we're talking about. This is going to be the heaviest SSTO that we have built yet, and you may notice that we're having to go with a dual fuselage because we don't really have a payload bay big enough to fit the Minmus colony modules in, so we're going to have to do this kind of dual fuselage setup and put our payload in the middle, usually inside of a fairing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. We took it out to the runway and it actually spawned backward, and then we fixed that and the landing gear kind of popped off. A little bit of an issue, so we added a extra landing gear on the back there to support the absolutely chunky weight of this thing. It weighs nearly like 400 tons. But now that the landing gear isn't absolutely dying under the weight of this thing, we can actually test it out to see if we can get it up to speed with those whiplash engines. Now, this is going to be pretty difficult to do because it has the aerodynamics of a fat penguin or brick, somewhere between those two. And as you can see, it didn't really work out too well for us. But we're going to give it a few more tries, and we're going to add a bit more pitch control to this, and by a bit more, I mean a lot more. We're going to try to force this thing into a nose-up attitude as much as possible. We also have a very heavy angle on the wings here, so you can just tell how heavy this thing is when it's partially fully fueled. It's not completely fueled, it's only partially fueled, and there's no payload there. It's just a dummy payload, but still, even with all of this, we just can't get it into the air. So I'm thinking maybe if we assist the whiplashes a little bit more, get them up to a higher speed so that they get more and more thrust, we can get off the ground, and sure enough, that does work. We just accidentally killed our back canards there on the way up, if you didn't notice. And I thought this was going to work out for us, but it just turned out that we burnt way too much fuel, and well, then we just exploded, which is also a slight issue. So we go back to the drawing board and just take the whiplash engines off. Now this was a bit of a leap of faith, if you might have noticed. I usually just do air breathing stages for the atmosphere, well, for the air. I don't usually do fully rocket SSTOs, or SSRTs as some may call them. I usually never fool around with this. To me, it's like, why not just build a rocket at that point? But this does have a lower thrust to weight than I would like to use with a rocket, especially when it's got a payload on board. And the wings absolutely do assist with getting it back to base. And it turns out simple is usually better. Without all of those weight of the whiplash engines and all the extra drag, this was able to get to orbit just fine. We did have a bit of a Starship IFT-3 issue with the re-entry though. Yeah, it completely blew up. To fix this, we added a heat shield behind the decoupler in front of the fairing on that middle part there, and then we added a 50-ton dummy payload to see if we can get it into orbit. And it turns out we got pretty darn close, so we're going to say that our payload mass is around 45 tons, as I think that would give us enough room to get into a low carbon orbit. So armed with that knowledge, I'm going to begin building the modules to the colony, each of them weighing around 45 tons. This is going to be the core and command module. It's also going to provide propulsion for the entire colony. There's going to be 4 of these. I call them as spokes. They hold fuel and kerbals. And then I'm going to build these communication units on top. They have 4 of those foldable antennas on them, and I can stack these and it'll act as a huge comnet relay on Minmus that'll extend our comnet range even farther than it already is. But we're going to get to the launch of that first core module. This is going to be your propulsion and command module in the middle there, and also probably the heaviest. Now, it being the heaviest module and us having extra fuel on this, the takeoff speed is absolutely insane. The takeoff speed is around 250-260 meters per second. That's closer to Mach 1 than it is to our usual SSTO takeoff speed of like 60 to 100 meters per second. So it's a pretty crazy speed, but that's because we made the wings as small as possible to minimize weight and drag. This whipped pretty flawlessly, except for the glitch where we lose our orbital lines there, so we did have to restart the game after this. And Jeb Kerman snuck on board. He's supposed to be in retirement, but he's stuck on board, and he was trying to be the station keeper. He was in the core section there. We're going to choose Elbro Kerman to be the station keeper instead, just a Kerbal to stay on board while we get everything docked together. Also, we kind of shredded our SSTO, at least the struts and the RCS, trying to get this thing away from it. Oops. We also put a ton of junk into orbit, and this is going to be a reoccurring theme. Just get ready for a lot of debris to get put into orbit.
I'm the trash man. I come out, I throw trash all over the ring.
Yeah, by the end of this, we got like 8 pieces of debris, or even more, probably, just floating around up there. Yeah, Kessler Syndrome is inbound. And our SSTO is also inbound for the KSC, hopefully. and if it doesn't melt or anything this time. So yeah, we have a pretty spicy re-entry with this first one, and we're just kind of trying to figure everything out. Turns out the fairing still gets a little bit too hot back there. It's still able to get heated around the heat shield. So we're going to probably end up having to put a bigger heat shield on this. And right now I'm just trying not to overshoot the KSC, which we did. We're still kind of figuring out the ballistics of this, if you would, and how we're going to land it, where we need to put the trajectory at to land it at the KSC. So we come around the front, which is very unusual for the aircraft only series, as we usually land on 09 right on the back, but this time we're landing on 27 right, or runway 1, as the game calls it. So we're going to just land here, and it turns out this thing is a little bit jumpy to land. It suffers from that heavy SSTO syndrome where it's got way too much lift when it's empty and barely any lift when it's full. But we're going to recover our SSTO and get right to the second launch. This is going to be the first spoke module, those little arms that come off the station, and of course it has a few bugs right off the bat. We actually burn off our landing gear, or landing legs on the front there, because the fairing doesn't actually take any heat away from the payload. The payload just takes heat right through the fairing like it's not even there. We just roll with it this time because it still has 2 landing legs on it. Should be fine. And we're going to dock with the core module. We're going to use the SSTO to dock with the core module here because this first iteration of the spoke module just did not have any control on its own, either for an oversight or I just figured I could use the SSTO for this. I don't remember, but we're going to dock, and the target indicator that tells you whether you're heading away from or to the target was going kind of crazy. We switched over to the module, and it was spinning for absolutely no reason. There was no reason it should have been spinning, but it was. So we get it working, and we point it toward the SSTO with the module, and we get them close enough, and then we release the module. Just free-floating, absolutely no control. It's basically a hunk of debris at that point. And we're going to have to use the core module here to do some interstellar docking stuff and dock with this completely dead module, which I think it was fairly easy. It actually ended up being as easy or easier than doing it with both of them having control. We just went past it to the end that we were wanting to dock to, because I wanted these to all be pointing the same way, although I ended up kind of screwing that up later on. We just point to this end. I wanted the crew sections to be closer to the actual core module, and we start backing toward it. Now, of course, we're going to have to dock with the side, so once we get close enough, we have to flip the core module around to the port that we're wanting to dock it to, and then bring it closer and closer. And KSP2 has a pretty cool docking system, where you just, when you get close enough, it just automatically docks for you. That's a lot easier than getting like perfect alignment and like millimeters away, which I feel like the original game kind of wanted you to get perfect before it would agree to dock for you. But later on, you'll see that KSP2 has its own docking issues. Just stay tuned for that. Then we're going to land this second SSTO, and I feel like we're getting slightly better at aiming. Now we kind of undershoot it, and we end up coming in pretty good. Pretty good trajectory here, and we're able to steer it right down with absolutely no fuel, by the way, in this one, because we had to do that whole docking and everything. We have no spare fuel to boost it up, so this is completely just a re-entry and glide down, like a space shuttle type of landing with absolutely no fuel. Usually I will use a little bit of extra fuel to land them if necessary, but we have as good of a landing as you can have with this SSTO, I feel like. Even though I was giving it full left rudder, it still veered off into the grass, which was a problem that plagued this for quite a while, and then it just magically fixed itself at some point. No idea what was going on with that, but we had some control to our next spoke module, and then this huge, large nose cone on the front docking port, which we'll de-dock later, and hopefully that will deflect the heat away inside the fairing, mind you, away from the landing legs and stuff. And you may be wondering why I even used a fairing at this point, and it seemed like it actually got much better performance with the fairing on, so we just left it. And we're just going to leave this spoke module in orbit, this next one, and just bring our SSTO back. And as you can see, we have the bigger heat shield on there too, which worked out great for our re-entry. And we land it down here with a little bit of fuel to spare this time, since we didn't do the whole docking procedure with this thing. And a slightly better landing, though it's just a tad bit bouncy, I would say. Just a little bit bouncy. But though shaking up, the crew is ready for the fourth launch, I believe now, for the fourth launch, the third spoke module to go up. Yeah, there was a lot of those. You're going to hear a lot of spoke module today. But this SSTO looks absolutely sick, and it sounds even cooler. So if you ask me, it was kind of worth all the launches, and the sound design in KSP2 is just great. So we release our next spoke module, and then we lose all of our orbital velocity in the SSTO. Yeah, no idea why that happened, but it happened, and we're falling from orbital height into the ground. So I'm just hoping at this point that we can just pull it up if we get enough velocity. Remember, this thing is very hard to fly. And then we find a nice beach and begin landing. We lose our left canard thing on the back and then switch over to the right one and put roll on it so we can counteract that imbalance in lift and then bring it down as nicely as we possibly can. And we're fine. It's absolutely fine. And we found out why the landing was so rough. The landing gear were all screwed up too on top of the whole landed state bug that we had there. So yeah, we do 2 more launches, the top comm module and the last spoke module. And this was probably the best landing that we had the entire time, the most normal landing that we had the entire time. We were pretty low on fuel, right at like around the perfect weight, I'd say, to land this thing at. We had a very smooth landing, especially given all the rough ones that we had earlier. But with all the main section launches out of the way, it's time to connect all of this like it's the Iron Giant and pull it all together into one station. So we're going to bring in the next opposite spoke module. We're going to try to keep them as balanced as possible so we can use the station's thrust if necessary. We try to align those landing gear as much as possible because there is no docking port rotation currently, and we get everything lined up. Looks pretty darn good. So now we're going to move on to the next module, and this one's going to have a bit of an issue. You see, after we docked that first one, something strange happened with the ship. It just would not dock with this module, no matter how close we got it, and I know this one was not lined up very well. We got it spot on a few times, and it just wouldn't dock. No matter what I did, it wouldn't dock. I tried for literally a day, and looked through the KSP forums and finally found the answer I was looking for. This absolute chat on the forums wrote out the most thorough directions to fix the exact issue we were having. So after delving through the game files and finding the docking port and reactivating it, it worked. We just reloaded the game and it automatically docked to itself. So yeah, they need to fix that. Took a little bit too much effort to fix that myself. I'm willing to deal with bugs as long as I can fix them in-game. Digging through game files is kind of crappy. Speaking of bugs I can fix in-game, of course we had a completely glitchless run after this. It's not like the station fell out of the sky or anything. Yeah, it just fell out of the sky. Much like the SSTO earlier, it just fell out of the sky when approaching it. So yeah, we reloaded a save and docked that last spoke module. So this is the last time you need to hear me saying that. And then we, of course, bring in our little top comm section. This is an absolute breeze to dock. You can just point them together and bring it in, and it'll just automatically dock to it. Though this did dock slightly crooked, and it stayed that way. It didn't fix itself for whatever reason. I don't know why. It just did not fix itself. So be prepared for a slightly crooked tower at the top. But that's as much as we're going to build an LKO of the colony, so we're going to send it out to Minmus and make this space station officially a surface base / colony. Now, the way I built this, since all of the weight is spread out across the station base colony evenly, we can just use the main propulsion unit in there, and we don't have to worry about any tilting bugs or anything like that with it. It just works. And we're going to land it at the ice flats there, the ice sheets, which aren't nearly as even and flat as they used to be. They're a little bit wavy. Even in these flat sections here, they're a tad bit wavy, which makes the whole docking process on the surface is going to be a little bit more difficult, because of course we're going to need a way to resupply this colony if it's truly a colony. We need to get Kerbals there and back and resupply it. So we built this shuttle of sorts that's going to supply our Kerbals there and then bring different supplies and rovers and whatever we need in the back section there. So we got cargo and Kerbals there. We add some boosters to it, and then we're going to add 2 more sections to this top extra propulsion module with extra communication and stuff, and then another comm unit at the bottom. This is our comm unit right here that we're going to launch, and this is going to be the second comm unit that's stacked on top of it. You may ask, why are you building more to this? while it's on the surface and making it more difficult on yourself? Well, I realized that I could probably get the little chonker mission if I somehow managed to make this thing heavier while it was on the surface. So I just bit the bullet and went for it and did 3 more launches to try to make this just a tad bit heavier, because I was guessing we were around 140 tons for the actual Minmus colony and everything. Like 60 more tons would push us over the edge. Well, it turns out that we couldn't really get 60 more tons on there. You'll see here in a bit what happened. But this first module was so chonky and so big that we couldn't actually fully get it into orbit with the SSTO. We had to just get it in a suborbital trajectory and have it finish the job itself. So then we're going to have to land this not at the runway and somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And that's exactly what we did. We landed between these 2 lakes here, which had a fairly flat spot, and it came down for a pretty darn good landing, especially compared to our last beach landing with this. And we were able to bring it to the stop completely safely. That was Jeb flying that, by the way. He just could not accept his retirement, no matter how hard I tried. And here we're just getting our overly complicated Minmus shuttle ready. We put some liquid-fueled boosters instead of these solid-fueled boosters that we had there. And we're just going to launch it on the back of the SSTO. In the future, I think I might connect 2 of these shuttles together and kind of do a system like that to get this into orbit. We'll experiment with this shuttle definitely in the future. But now we're going to dock all of the modules here that are going to go on the top together in the order they're going to go in. So those are just permanently docked now. And then we're going to dock the shuttle to them. Now the shuttle is going to have to move eventually off the top of this whole rig. And the shuttle's actually going to boost us out there using those 2 liquid fuel boosters. Halfway through the Minmus burn, they run out of fuel and we have to flip over and light our vacuum engines. Yeah, lighting those engines sounds kind of funny, just a little bit funny. Those are those super optimized collapsible vacuum engines. We also have a perfect booster separation that was not awkward whatsoever. And then we continue our burnout to Minmus, which was highly successful, but we did use quite a bit of fuel getting there. And after much trial and error, we finally do get it lined up with the colony. The only problem was, as we got closer and the colony actually finally loaded in, things got a little bit jiggly. Yeah, when you're working with this much part count on a surface, it's bound to have a few issues. I went ahead and let our whole segment here just fall down, and I was expecting a much bigger explosion. I was kind of disappointed with that. But we reload, and we come in from the side, gradually loading in and switching back and forth between both of them until everything looked like it was fine. And it did work out pretty darn well. We had to be very careful about not melting anything off of the main colony, but we were able to finally dock this thing to the top. And just look how silly it looks with everything docked to the top like that. So we do have to flip the shuttle off the top to deploy the shuttle's secret payload. That's right, this shuttle has had a payload in the back of it the entire time. We just need to get it off of here and bounce it around a bunch before we can finally get the payload out of the back. There is one small issue though. You see, the payload doesn't want to come out of the back. We have this little kneeling feature where it can kind of duck down, and then I also actually made a cargo ramp out of a all-moving control surface back there to add for aesthetics, and it actually does kind of help stuff roll out. But we just had to do some drastic measures to get this thing out of the back because it just wasn't budging. Despite being disconnected, we just could not get a Kerbal inside of one of the seats, and we just basically ended up having to more or less fart it out of the back. But after we did fart it out of the back, it landed safely, and revealing that we had packed a rover, a science rover, that we should be able to drive all the way around Minmus, getting as many science bombs and samples and things as we need to get. It's just a little bit slow. But I mean, you're driving around on ice. What are you supposed to do? We do have to bring the whole shuttle all the way back, and boy does it look goofy with both cargo doors open. By the way, that front nose cone, the payload bay in the front, is to protect the front docking port from re-entry heating, as those are very, very sensitive, even the shielded one. Which, by the way, we're about to use that docking port, and I wasn't intending to dock it at this angle. You see, whenever you dock at this angle, the whole colony just snaps under the surface, exploding the whole thing into the most glorious fireball I've seen yet in Kerbal Space Program 2. I mean, this was a massive fireball. I would venture to say it was around half a kilometer wide. Absolutely huge. But, yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So we're going to have to come up with an alternative means of docking this to the space station Minmus colony thing. And that involved sending it up in the air a little bit, like floating it up in the air with the main engines on the colony, and then docking them mid-air and then landing it back down the surface. That worked out well, and now it's time to refuel the ship itself. We need to put some more fuel back in there so we can actually reliably get back to Kerbin. That's one of the great features here. We got a bunch of spare fuel for future missions and stuff. We're also going to put Elbro on the shuttle so he can get some rest. He's been stationed keeping this thing for a while now. And then we're going to take our shuttle off and head back to Kerbin with the old worn-out crew, and probably go get a new crew and bring them back, because by the time we get back, it'll probably be an old crew on Minmus. So, the vigilant odd among you may notice that I was very liberal in my use of the fuel on board of this thing, because we had plenty enough fuel to get back to Kerbin. So I went ahead and put us in a nice low orbit before re-entering, and what a re-entry it was. Very fun re-entry. It felt like landing a space shuttle properly for the first time in this series. And we even had a little bit of fuel in case we drop below our speed, because this thing is not a drag-optimized SSTO. It is a chunky, draggy shuttle, and it loses speed so fast. You'll probably notice here that it's losing speed rapidly. We also have to open up the payload door in the front so the pilots can see. We don't have to do that, but I'm doing it because, I mean, the pilots are going to want to see out the front. It's just realism, I guess. We come right down the center line and kind of slam it into the ground a tiny bit. Came down pretty slow. It's just a wonky shuttle to land. Even in the testing for this, I had a very hard time landing it just from dropping it over top of the KSC. But we did land it just fine. Dropped the drogue chutes back there at the drag chutes, and yeah, worked just good. We can go refurbish this and put it on another SSTO and send it back to our fully functioning Minmus colony with a rover. We didn't get much science out of this at all, but we got just enough to finish out Tier 2 and get 2 nodes that we probably aren't going to very much use, and over in Mission Control, we still haven't got the little chunker mission. But that's all I've got for today. That took like 20 hours to record and even longer to edit, so I'm going to go take a long nap and then work on the next video. But for right now, this is Smooneychad, out.